Hello and welcome to the Quarantined Wargamer. I'm Big Lee and today we're going to play The Men Who Would Be Kings using my 6mm Anglo Zulu war collection. So as you can see today I'm not wearing my normal shirt, I'm wearing my Zulu war shirt from Art of War. Very nice, I do like this shirt and I do like to wear it when I'm playing with Zulu war stuff. And today on the table we've got some of my just a small portion of my 6mm Anglo Zulu war collection. And I've been experimenting with different sets of rules to try and find one that would suit me with my 6mm collection. And I've been doing a few experiments with The Men Who Would Be Kings with a few alterations to make it suitable for 6mm. So essentially the major changes is instead of using inches we're using centimetres. Other than that the rules are pretty much the same, but I'll be using dice to mark off casualties because obviously I've based my men in groups, the figures in groups, so you can't take off individual figures like you would if you had larger models. And I've increased the amount of the figure ratio just because the units look better when they're bigger. So let's chat for me and we'll get straight on with the game. So the setup here is my small table in my room, which is about 2.5 foot by 4 foot, so it's not very big at all, but ideal for 6mm war games, frankly. I have experimented with the idea of slightly enlarging it, but to be honest I'm a little pushed for room in my operations room anyway, so this will have to do for today, but certainly enough for the game that I have planned. So what I've got is a slightly more than a 24 point field force for the British and similar for the Zulus, and we've got a setup here with some very basic terrain. So a camp for the British over here. They've managed to set up a line with some mounted cavalry deployed out front to provide them with some sort of skirmishing fire, and over here the Zulus lined up but with a few more units in a hidden position so they can't be seen. As you can see, we've got a kraal over there. Essentially the backstory in my head is that the British have come along, they've done some very poor reconnaissance, decided the kraal was abandoned. No sooner have they set up camp than Zulus start appearing over the horizon, and they quickly formed a skirmish line. So you've got two regular British companies flanking a field gun and some Natal native contingent. They put them in the middle because they know they're a little bit flaky, a little less reliable, so they put them in the middle to try and bolster them, and the mounted cavalry have dismounted and basically formed a skirmishing line out front. The idea being is they can start putting some fire into the advancing Zulu units and then retreat when the Zulus get too close, so that if they retreat from this position and the Zulus get to here, they start to come under fire from the regular units. So the idea is we're trying to maximise the amount of fire hitting the Zulu units before they finally get into contact. It's a fairly open field, other than a few pieces of rough terrain, so really the British have got themselves quite a nice position. However, what they're not taking into account is the fact that you've got this ridge here which is effectively shielding part of their flank, and we're going to play through it and see if they notice the fact that we've got some Zulu units over here that may try to flank them. You know, how far are they going to advance down the British flank before the British notice them is the big question. So that's the setup. So we're going to get on with play. In this particular case the Zulus are the attackers, so they'll be going first. So the Zulus are going to go first and they get a 3 moves. Normally you would have to roll to see if the leader is able to get his unit to do what he wants them to do, but certain types of units have free actions. So in the case of the Zulus, they can either stand to, which basically means doing nothing, or move. And they're a free action, they don't have to roll to see if they take that action, whereas other units might have to roll to see if they will actually move on when they're ordered to. So for the Zulus that's an advantage because obviously they want to try and get in fairly early. But what I'm going to do is the Zulus aren't going to move initially, or at least some of the units aren't. The sharpshooters over here are going to move, and as with most Zulus they can move 8 centimetres. Normally 8 inches, but in my case I'm going to do 8 centimetres. So I'll measure from the front of the unit to there because I want them to get in front slightly so that they can get some shots off, maybe force these horse cavalry out of the way. The rest of the Zulus on the hill are going to stand there and bang their shields and basically draw the attention of the British. Meanwhile, just slightly out of camera shot, down here, I don't think you see down here, just off of camera, there are two other Zulu units. Now they are going to move, so they're going to move again 8 centimeters. So again, still off a camera shot. I think. So if I move the camera down slightly so you can just see them. So they're moving and they're trying to keep these row of hills between them and the British, so that they can stay out of sight. So they've moved forward, the rest aren't. They're standing there making a racket, drawing the attention of the British over here. Now it's the turn of the British. The two regular infantries and the irregular infantries, in this case the Natal native contingent, they haven't got anywhere near the range, so basically they're not going to do anything. For the British, both the regular and irregular units can stand to as a free action. So in other words, they're ready, they're standing there, they're not going to do much else. So now the gun can fire, because that might possibly have the range. I'll measure it after I've attempted to fire. So I need to roll to see if his leader will be able to get his gun to do the action that it wants. So in this case, I need to roll 6 or more with 2d6. Yep, I get 11, so that's enough. That unit will now fire. So the range for these is 36 inches for long range. So 36 centimeters in this case, and lo and behold, 36 centimeters is there. So basically that's long range on the gun, so you can't do anything at the moment. But we now know from that test shot, we now know its range. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to skip forward a little bit. I'm going to play a couple of turns until all of the units are starting to get within firing range, and then we'll do a couple of sequences of that, and then we'll skip on to some actual melees. So at the moment everyone's out of range and they're just moving into position. So we'll skip over the boring bit and we'll start up again once everything's in firing range. So the Zulus are continuing to advance towards the British line, with their eyes firmly set on the mounted cavalry that have sort of set up a skirmish line ahead of the main British line. In the process of sort of swinging around slightly, the Zulus have ended up in a sort of a diagonal formation. They'll try and sort that self out, because I think they want to hit the British square on when the time comes. But for the moment, they've been within range of the guns of the mounted infantry over here. So the mounted infantry have already fired and done a couple of casualties. At extreme range, that's pretty good going, because any hits are halved for the purposes of casualty removal, and in this case I'm using dice to mark off the casualty removal. But they've moved again, and so the mounted infantry are getting another turn. So as previously mentioned, I've doubled the size of the units but not the number of dice they're throwing. So I've got 16 men representing an 8-man unit according to the rules. So that's 8 dice that are going to be thrown for to hit. But first I need to make sure that this unit can actually fire. Now a mounted infantry firing is actually a leadership test, so I need to roll more than 6 with 2d6 to see that they follow the orders of their commander. They get a 6, so just about. So he barks some orders and his men do as they're told, and they will fire. So I now get to roll 8 dice, and then for those 8 dice I need to roll 5s or more. And as I say, because it's still considered long range, I'll add up the number of hits and halve it to see how many casualties. So let's see how well they do. Well, not too bad. Basically 3 hits, which is going to be rounded down. That will be 1 casualty. So I'm going to change that to a 3. So out of a 16-man tribal unit, have now taken 3 casualties. Now, this doesn't sound like a lot, but it's going to add up when these units finally reach the British lines and end up going into melee. The question is, how much more damage will they take before they finally get into melee? In the meantime, down here, there's more Zulus sneaking around behind the hills, trying to get to flank the British line, which you can just see over there. So as you can see, the main Zulu body has managed to straighten up slightly in its advance. It's still probably at long range from that mounted infantry, but nonetheless it's advancing steadily. And I'm sure the British in the main line over here are starting to get a little bit worried, because there's a lot of Zulus heading towards them, an absolute wall of Zulus. Meanwhile, these 2 units, which aren't very high quality, but nonetheless they've managed to go miraculously completely unnoticed. I've been rolling for them at every turn to see if they get noticed, and so far they've managed to get round the flank using this ridge line to shield them, and they're now level with the mounted infantry in their forward position, and they're starting to get into a position where they can genuinely threaten the flank of the British line. We'll have to see how long it takes for them to be noticed and what the British do in response when they do notice them. So on the Zulu move, 2 units decided they were going to attempt to charge. And when you charge, you do a full move and you roll a d6 to see how far extra you go. Potentially they could have reached the mounted infantry line, but unfortunately both units rolled particularly poorly, and although they've moved faster than the Zulu units either side of them, they didn't go fast enough to make contact and therefore open a melee with the mounted infantry, which is going to give the mounted infantry a chance to get the hell out of there, because I don't think they really want to go toe to toe with some pretty much full strength Zulu units. Meanwhile, the 2 flanking units have finally reached a position where they've gone completely unnoticed, and they've now reached a position where they've actually crested the top of this hill, and I'm going to declare that the British are now aware of them. The Zulus have completed their move and they're now visible to the rather alarmed British on this flank of the British line. So the British have now got a chance to react to that on their move. So it's been quite an eventful turn for the British. The mounted infantry have managed to successfully mount up and flee. You don't actually have to mount them as separate figures, but I've got them painted up, so I've swapped them over to mounted, and they're making as much speed as they can away from the advancing Zulus. Meanwhile, the British, who now are aware of the flanking attempt by the Zulus, one of the regular units has started to move out of the way so that it can allow a gap for the mounted infantry to go and fill the line, and also change its facing so that it's now facing this potential threat that's coming in from the side here. That remains to be seen whether that's a wise move or not, but that's what's happening at the moment. And the field gun has finally managed to get a shot off, and it hits on a 4+, so even at long range it did a couple of points of damage on this veteran Zulu unit over here. So the gun has started to fire. So now the British are going to start to come into their own. The sheer firepower of their line could do a lot of damage to the Zulus, and really it's just a question of, are the Zulus going to be in any fit state to enter into melee when they finally get to the British line, which they almost certainly will. If they take enough damage, they may well get pinned, but at the moment that's not happened. Been another crucial turn for the British. The British regulars that managed to turn have moved just enough to allow the fleeing mounted cavalry to get into their position, and next turn they'll probably go back onto foot, so they're ready to meet the advancing Zulus in the line. Meanwhile, the regular British unit here, which is actually an elite unit, managed to fire. The Zulus were within range and exposed, so they targeted the lead Zulu unit, and they did an absolute devastating amount. They did 4 casualties. Now, considering that's a long range shot, that was an amazing set of dice. And that means that the unit, whenever a unit takes casualties from firing, it has to roll to see if it's pinned, and in this case 4 casualties comes off the roll, and the Zulu unit there is pinned, and it's going to have to see if it can rally to move again. So that's possibly saved the flank for the British at this crucial moment early in the battle. Meanwhile, over at the other side of the battlefield, the guns have opened fire again, and this time they've opened fire again on the flank unit of the Zulus, and again did 2 casualties, and they failed their pin test as well, so they've now been pinned. So if the British can keep the Zulus back, so far the Zulus have been very lucky with their pin tests and have managed to continue to advance, but this turn things are starting to go a little bit wrong for them. They're close, and they're getting closer to the British line, and indeed most of the Zulu units are still out of musket or rifle range, but the gun is doing quite a bit of damage, so we'll see what happens in the next turn. So as the Zulus creep a little bit further forward, the British get off this time a fairly devastating volley across most of the front of their line. The British A Company, who are elites, manage to get off a fire at close range, so they get the full impact of their volley fire. So it improves their fire rating on this unit, doing 4 casualties. Even though their dice roll was pretty poor, their actual firing roll was pretty poor, their fire rating was so good at this range that they still managed to do 4 casualties, and it resulted in this unit now being pinned. Meanwhile, the other unit failed its rally save and had to retreat half a move. Luckily, if it had failed that rally by any more, it would have routed off the table, so it was very lucky to still even be on the table. Meanwhile, the mounted infantry have managed to get back on foot, have opened fire, and they only done 1 casualty on the veteran Zulu unit here, but nonetheless it all adds up. The guns have opened fire on this unit over here, done a significant amount of damage. I mean, it was quite horrendous. I gulped when it happened. It wasn't a surprise when that unit was immediately pinned, having now been reduced to half of its original strength. So it's got 8 casualty markers on there, and this is a 16-man unit or 16 casualty unit under these rules. And again, this veteran unit took quite a lot of fire from the other regular British unit, admittedly at long range, but they fired really well, and combined with earlier damage, they're now nearly at half strength, and they were pinned by that. Meanwhile, the Zulus have managed to bring out one of their sharpshooter unit, which had been slowly working its way around the flank, and although it's now out in the open and probably not advisable, at the end of the day they're not going to get to do much else if they don't come out, so I've decided to bring them out and try and put a bit of pressure on the British flank. This unit over here, this Zulu unit over here, managed to pass its rally save, so next turn it will be able to move. So things are getting close, but the Zulus are taking a lot of casualties under the relentless British fire. British fire ripples across the entire line and has a significant impact. These Zulus here take 4 casualties in a volley of fire. Fortunately, they still managed to avoid being pinned, but nonetheless they've been severely weakened. And then as we work our way up the line, we see more units, more Zulu units that have been pinned by fire, as each British unit fires. The gun in particular is particularly nasty. Even the Zulu shooters over in the back that have just come out of the woods copped a load of fire, and although they managed to avoid getting pinned, they've nonetheless taken quite a few casualties. So still just a question of, can the Zulus finally get in? There's most of these units that are pinned, or all these units that are pinned, are going to have to do a rally this turn, but there is 1 unit that could possibly manage to get into melee, maybe, well, 2 units that might be able to get into melee. The one here on the flank, and this one would have to move at the double to get in there. We'll have to see. This is doubtful. This is a little bit more likely. Sorry, this one's a little bit more likely to get in. So we'll see what happens, and then I'll come back and show you what's going on. So the Zulus have continued to try to advance, but these 2 units have failed to rally and had to retreat slightly. This unit attempted to charge, move at the double, but didn't quite roll high enough to close that distance, and has ended up extremely close. Unfortunately, it's right in front of the guns, the rather poor guns, it has to be said, of the NNC, so maybe that's not quite the disaster it looks like. This unit is pinned and was unable to move. This unit managed to rally, but other than that it can't do anything. And over here, one of these flanking units has finally managed to close the gap and get into a melee. They've just rolled. Basically you just add up the number of active figures on each side, and it's a dice each, and see what happens. Basically it was a draw, 5 casualties per side, which is obviously slightly more devastating for the British because it's a smaller unit, but considering the Zulu unit already had some casualties, it's now well below half strength, and as a result of that draw, it now has to retreat back half a move. So let's do it that way round, move that out of the way, move back half a move. But it doesn't have to take a pinning test, neither side has to make a pinning test. So it could probably resume again next turn if it doesn't take any more fire, of course, from the British. But at the moment it's in a very unenviable position. It's managed to fail in its assault of the British line and is now looking down the barrel of some Martini Henrys or the like. So not a very good position for that particular Zulu unit. So now it's the British turn, and we'll see what happens. So now that things are getting very close, I decided I would do a whole turn playthrough and show you how these rules work a little bit more. So just a slight adjustment there so we can see everything that's going on. I'm going to leave this particular firefight to last, just tease you with it, and we'll start at the other end of the British line. So we'll measure this out. I'll use my tape measure this time because it's a better colour. So they're now well within close range. Only 11 dice this time because the British have already taken 1 casualty from Zulu shots. So that's 8, 10, so 11 dice. But the British need 5s when they're firing, and because they're at close range and they've got volley fire, they actually get a bonus of 1 to that. So in other words, they need 4s or more against this unit here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and because it's close range, that means 5 kills. So we'll grab an extra marker dice. Oh, excuse my arm in the shot. So they're on a total of 9 now, so that's not good. So 6, 7, 8, 9, and because that unit's taken fire, it now needs to roll to see if it's pinned. Now it took 5 casualties, so that's 5 off of this dice roll. It already needs a 5 with no discipline bonus, so it basically needs to roll very high indeed if it wants to pass, and it fails dismally, so it is now pinned. Move that with my hand slightly. So not a great position given that it's right under the guns of the British. I'll put a bit of smoke down to show that those British men have fired. So now it's the turn of the gun. He's a little less worried about these units because they're further back and they've been retreating because they haven't managed to rally, but he is a little bit more concerned about this. He can fire on that unit, he's got the angle, so he's going to fire. So again, full crew, it's going to be 8 dice. They need 4s or more to hit, and at this range, close range, everyone will be a kill. So it'll be 1 dice, 1 hit per kill. Oh, what an awful roll. He basically only manages to do 2 casualties. So now this unit has got a roll to see if it gets pinned. So -2 from this dice roll. Now that particular unit, it has no discipline bonus, but it does have a reasonably good leader, so it needs to roll a 5. So you take 2 off of this dice roll, and then we've got 6, and -2 is 4, so it is actually pinned. So we'll grab another pinned marker. Oh, again, a terrible position. The Zulus are learning to their cost that a frontal assault on British guns isn't a particularly good idea. So again, I'm going to put a little puff on so I know that they've fired. Right, so I'll put it in the direction it's fired. The Tail Native contingent, now they're using pretty poor muskets. They've been very poorly armed. Typically only 1 in 10 would have a gun. But for the purposes of these rules, they've given them a rather poor musket. So I'm going to have a quick roll for them. Their hit rate is 5s or more. And they do another 2 damage, so that takes that up to 12. So this unit is getting seriously battered. Oh, there's another 6 in there. So these tiny dice, I'll have to go for some bigger marker dice perhaps. And we're going to roll again to see if they get double pinned basically. No, that time they manage it, so we're fine. Now we have the mounted cavalry. Now they're going to shoot at this unit here, because this is the more threatening of the 2 that's in front of them, particularly as this one could threaten the British unit here, so they're going to aim for that one. So I'm going to measure from the middle of the unit, so it's about 11 centimeters, which makes that still close range, because they're still using a modern rifle. But again, they're smaller units, so it's only 8 dice. So I've got 8 dice. I need to hit on a 5 or more, but every hit will be a casualty. So let's roll them. Oh, another bad roll, only 2. But nonetheless, 2 is better than nothing, so we'll change that number to a 4. That unit has now got a roll to see if it can save. Now that particular unit has no discipline bonuses, so whatever I roll has got a -2 to it, and I need a 7 because it's got a poor leader. So it gets an 8, but -2 makes it a 6, so it fails. So this unit has now been pinned as well. This is a terrible state of affairs for the Zulus. As I say, they're learning to their cost the poor decision to charge the British positions. Now over here, oh, hang on, another little smoke marker just to show that they fired. Oh, and I didn't put one on the NNC. Doesn't make a blind bit of difference to the game, but I do like the look of it. Now this British unit is going to fire. Now these are my best of the 2 regular units. So they're going to fire. They have taken some casualties now. So there would normally be 12 men in the unit. Now there's only 7. So I'm only going to roll 7 dice. But they still get that volley bonus. And they are definitely at close range. So basically I've got +1 to this dice roll. So for this particular company, instead of hitting on a 5+, I'll be hitting on a 4+. And cool, 4 hits. So that's another 4 casualties over here. So again, change that to a 6, and I'll just grab another. And this unit is now going to have to take another pin check, and oh, no problem with these models, knocking them around. Pin check, so it's going to be no bonus for discipline, and a -2 to this roll, and they're going to need a 7. Oh, they rolled high and they still managed to save. That's incredible. So they're not pinned. Mind you saying that, there's not a lot of them left, so there's probably not a lot more they can do, but nonetheless they are unpinned. So that's the end of that British go, and I think that has pretty much seen the Zulus off. We'll give it another couple of goes and see what happens. So now the firepower of the Imperial troops really counts, and 2 Zulu units are effectively wiped out and removed from the table. The sharpshooters, the Zulu sharpshooters that were on the flank, finally took enough damage to be removed, as did the Umsiju regiment that was facing off against the NNC. The NNC got a very good volley off, an incredibly good volley to be honest, considering how poorly armed they are, and at such close range it finally did the damage required, and that unit was actually removed. So over on this side of the table, the Zulus are doing appallingly. However, here is a different matter. Various Zulu units had managed to rally and have managed to weather fire from the British troops without being pinned again, which, sorry, I had to put some smoke on that unit there. Basically, they've taken a lot of fire, they've taken some more casualties, but they weren't pinned. Now, over here, these two units have both had to fall back, so they're pinned, but these two units are free to move, and it's now the Zulus' turn, and they are close enough now to get into contact. So we're going to start to see some very risky close quarters fighting, and this British unit has already taken significant casualties. So when they join up, there will be some squaring off, and I can see this going quite badly for the British on this flank. So let's take the move. This unit here doesn't have to roll for extra movement. It can get to the British in under 8 centimetres. So I'm going to move them up, and what I'll do is I'm going to square the British off against them. So they've moved into contact, and we immediately do the attack, the melee itself. But what I'm also going to do while I'm at it, I'm going to just roll for these. These are going to do the double move to see if they can get into contact. So you roll an extra dice for movement, so they're going to do an extra 5 on top of their 8. So basically they can go 13. That's just enough for them to slam into the mounted infantry. And this unit, although it's taken a lot of casualties, it's taken 7 out of its 16 potential figures. There's enough of them left to probably make quite a bit of a difference in the melees. So we're going to resolve this melee first. So this British unit here has taken some casualties. They've taken 5 out of their 12-man unit, so that only leaves them with 7 dice to roll in this particular melee. But the Zulu unit that's hitting them has also taken quite a lot of damage from firepower, leaving them only with 6 dice to roll. And it's a straight roll off, 1 hit per figure. The difference is that both sides will be rolling to beat they need to beat their fight value, but in this case this is a rather poor quality unit, so they need to hit on a 5+, and so do the British. So it's a straight roll. It's just the British have got a slight advantage on dice. So we'll roll for the Zulus first. Nothing, no hits whatsoever. Oh man, British. Let's see. They only got to get 1 to win this fight, and they need to win this. 2. So they hit. They do 2 damage. So I'll take another dice off of, or 2 more off of that Zulu unit, and it immediately falls back 4 centimetres, and then must take a pin test. So the usual, it's their 2d6 plus their discipline minus the number of casualties they just took. So basically this roll will be a -2, and they need to beat to achieve the leadership value of this particular unit, which is a 7. So it's quite a large ask. I need to roll basically a 9 or more. Failed. So that unit has now been pinned, having been pushed back in the melee. So the British got off there. Now it's going to be a different matter. So over here, the mounted infantry, they've not taken any casualties so far, so they're going to start this melee with 8 dice. And the Zulus have taken 7 casualties so far, so they're going to start with 9 dice. So there's the 6 I had from the other group, another 3 dice there. So I'll roll for the Zulus first again. And again, this particular unit, they need again to roll a 5 or more to hit. Oh my word, 1. Terrible, absolutely terrible. These Zulus are useless. And the mounted infantry, again, they're going to need a 5 or more to hit. Well, there you go, 4. They win decisively. So again, we're going to take the casualties off of here, so that raises that to a 5. The unit's going to fall back 4 centimetres, because I'm using centimetres rather than inches. And then the unit's got to take, that Zulu unit's got to take a pin test, -4 to this roll. So although this is a veteran unit, so it gets a +1, you take off 4, so it's effectively rolling with a -3 on this roll. However, they have a good leader, so their leadership value, they need to roll a 5 or more. So in this case, they need to roll 8 or more to win. No, they don't. So they're pinned. To be honest, I think that's the game over as far as the Zulus are concerned. They've finally managed to get into melee with the British. You know, they finally brought onto this flank, but they've now taken so much damage. These units are down to the last few men. I may yet make some half-size mod units so that I can swap them over as the units take more damage. So like the British, I could remove bases if I wanted to. I haven't done it in this game just for the look of it, but I could remove bases if I wanted to. I need to make some half-size Zulu units so I could take them off when they've gone below half strength, for instance. But essentially, you know, this unit here has been reduced to, you know, 5. I think it's 5 figures. This one's been reduced to just 4 figures. They're all pinned, so that means that they effectively ain't going to be able to do anything on their turn other than try and rally, and they're still facing the guns of the Imperial troops. I'm going to call this, I think it's about time we basically called this an Imperial victory. Not entirely surprising given that they had open sights on the Zulus for most of the time that they were advancing, and the Zulus' attempt to get round the flank, although that was successful, ultimately the British were able to hold them back. Bit of luck, but also the firepower really counted in the end. So there you have it, a not entirely unsurprising British victory, and a first proper full-scale playthrough with the men who would be kings. I'm sure I've missed loads of rules out. I'm going to go and reread the rules now to see what I might have forgotten. I didn't go into leadership traits this time, I just kept it down to their values. Next time I'll start to introduce leadership traits and so on. And I'm just going to reread the rules to see what I missed, because no doubt, like I say, I'm sure I got things wrong. The whole point of playing this game is to sort of like learn the basics, learn something as I play the game, figure out what I did wrong, and then do it again and try and improve on it. It's basically what I did with my approach with Chain of Command, and it's my general approach to solo play, because when you're playing on your own, you've got no one else there to remind you that you've missed something or you've screwed up. So the whole point of playing these sort of small solo games is to just keep doing the rules, rereading, keep going until eventually you sort of like get everything in place. So I think the game went really well. I enjoyed it. You know, very predictable result given the way I'd set things up, but it was a good learning experience. I think I've sort of embedded in my head the core of the rules, and like I say, I'm now going to go back and reread them and just see what I've missed. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. It's a bit of a long one for me, but you know, trying to show you what's going on does take a little bit of time. I hope you enjoyed them. There'll probably be some more Zulu games at some point in the future, and I'm going to be trying to do some other playthroughs as well as the year goes by. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and as usual, if you enjoyed it, please hit the like and subscribe buttons, and of course leave some comments here over on my blog, Big Lee's Miniature Adventures. So until next week, stay safe, and of course, keep rolling high.